Hello everyone and welcome to Just Draw, Just Paint 11. This week we are going to do something pretty interesting, which is talk about workflow. So what we see before you is me starting out a landscape painting, and this week what I want to do is start with a basic sketch as we have in the past. And when I say basic, I literally mean as dirty as what you see in front of you. Now, the purpose of this demo today, I suppose it's a little bit of a demo, it's not just me having fun, is to kind of go over my workflow that I use sometimes when I'm working professionally, which is, starting super rough, coming up with an idea, and then bashing some photo into the actual image itself. And then once we have a base that we're happy with, that has something to do with the story, the feel, the look of the place, we then manipulate the image into something with more appeal, something with more painterliness. And where you decide to stop is really up to you. If you're an experienced artist with really good fundamentals, you could potentially just take it straight into a painting, paint the entire thing up over what you have as a base, or you can allow some of the photo to peek through and keep some photorealism depending on what you're looking for. So this method is one I've been using for absolute ages. It works really, really well with things like video games, things like films. It works well in telling an idea very, very quickly, because this entire process, you could probably do it in a day, like very, very quickly. And if you're smart, you could set up a bunch of these and get them all done in the space of a day or two. And that's quite good because you can have so many paintings ready to be viewed and sort of decisions to be made, or pass it on to the next department, that kind of thing. So here I blew up the sketch, I threw a photo behind it, I blurred out the photo, and now I'm just picking out some of the values from that photo. And you can see I've actually pixelated the photo above just so I have a very simple palette to work with. Now later on I'll increase the saturation and the overall brightness of this, but for now, what I'm looking for, if you've seen any of my previous paintings, is just structure, right? I need something to be a basic idea. I know that I want stairs on the left, some kind of building in the foreground, something in the midground, and trailing off into a mountainscape in the background. It's quite a simple composition, but pretty soon I come to realize that this is going to be a road. So first thing we need to do, grab some photos and start cutting out pieces of it and start placing it where we want to start building our building. So it just so happens I really like this photo, and I found a bunch of photos that would work really, really well with this piece. We are not 100% here to talk about how to manipulate photos into place or the techniques behind positioning. But as you can see, I have a pretty easy perspective, 2-point perspective in the background, and I'm using that as a base to try and find my perspective for all my buildings. So anything going off to the right-hand side, pretty easy to find using the grid. And so I'm cutting out pieces and I'm repositioning those pieces. In other words, I'm quote-unquote bashing them into place, right? And this photo bashing technique was pretty popular, I would say, maybe like 10 years ago when it first arrived in the scene. And since then, it's sort of been replaced a little bit by 3D. But the thing with 3D is it's really, really slow, right? It unfortunately takes so long to model up an idea, to set your surfacing, all of that kind of stuff. It can take ages. And so I actually find this technique to be quite liberating and quite freeing, because you can still design and still make huge changes like I am now to, say, for example, the foreground or the midground or the background. And the beauty of that is I'm painting, I'm drawing, I'm painting, I'm drawing, I'm borrowing, I'm putting into position, and I'm leaning on what's already working in the real world, right? Like, these buildings are already beautiful. I don't need to do too much work to them. They already have so much going for them, right? So if I was to start this from scratch and come up with a shape language and put it in position and get the lighting and the texture working and the color variation, all of these things would just take so long that it would take a painting many, many days or longer to kind of just solve, right? And if you have a big team and that team is dedicated to solving visual problems, that's great. But if you're under the gun and you need something tomorrow or in the next 5 minutes, this technique can save you a world of pain. And because of that, I think it's actually quite an undervalued skill set. The ability to kind of just conjure something from what's already existing is a very cool skill set to have. And by the way, it's also a really fun skill set, right? Like, I'm not doing anything magical here. I'm just dropping images in and bashing them together to get some kind of read and some kind of plausibility to this landscape. And I'm not taking everything. I'm just taking the parts I like from various images. You can see I'm using layer modes. I'm using different brush techniques. I'm using masks. I'm painting in, I'm painting out. And the beauty of this is that you can start to construct detail or infer detail and form in your paintings pretty quickly, right? So I'm going to use this basic idea for all my rocks in here. I'm going to use it for the ground. And I'm going to try and get this composition as far as I possibly can using the bashing technique before I go in and control everything. And that is the crux of the matter, which is it's actually not easy to produce these if you don't have great fundamentals, because when you run into problems like something looking too photo-y or not working or the color is weird, like all of your fundamentals have to come in and save you from those problems. So everything I'm dropping in here, I'm carefully controlling. I'm thinking about the color. I'm thinking about how it matches to the environment. I'm thinking about overall shape composition. I'm thinking about things in the foreground being more detailed than in the background, which I'll start to control as the image progresses. I'm thinking about more contrast, more saturation in areas of focus and areas that I like. And at the same time, I'm making sure that anything I put in here, even though it's saving me time, has to work with the overall vision of what I'm trying to do. So this is not an easy technique. It kind of looks like it from the surface, but it actually takes a lot of time and effort and skill, right? It takes a lot of experience to know how to do this effectively. So, of course, I'm always a bit wary of showing you guys things that might be a bit too, let's call it esoteric for now, right? Where you sort of like, oh, feel into the painting. You get a lot of those comments. Oh, just feel into it, dude. You'll find it. I was like, no, like, give me techniques, give me answers, right? But unfortunately, with this kind of thing here, unless you have a background of understanding how value works, how shape works, how atmosphere works, it's just going to inherently be difficult, right? So at this point of the painting, I'm starting to work in all the pieces and starting to homogenize them to the color palette. I'm starting to just grab as many photos as I can and plonk them in here. You can see a bit of a time lapse there where I jumped in and fixed the foreground. I changed the building design almost entirely. And what I'm doing now is I'm starting to fix problems. This is the stage that I was saying earlier. Like, you can throw things in, but that doesn't mean they're accurate. So these photos are not fitting my perspective, and some of the structure has been broken. So I have to come in now, find out where they're broken, and go fix those areas and include additional detail that wasn't in the original photo. So in this way, I'm actually painting into this and adding new elements that weren't there before. Okay, so there's my perspective, just changing out the roof, making sure my values read, making sure the shadows work, that there's thickness to things, that there's a completeness to these roof tiles. Adding a little bit of like a Colosseum type shape on the top of that roof back there. And here's a fun thing, right? I only used 2 buildings to find the midground and background. Everything else is inferred either by paint detail or otherwise. I'll invent something if I need something. I'll add additional form. I'll borrow values and colors. And I do a little bit of cleanup here and there, but now I'm adding just a little extra form. Separating elements, creating homogeneity. So I wanted more of that building to be exposed, so I just quickly painted in more of the building, and we'll continue to do that. Darkening up the foreground now, and now I'm starting to put in the shadows of the scene. So this is the point at which I'm thinking about the lighting, right? So notice the building on the right is the building that is dictating my lighting, because I can see from that building what the lighting should be doing and which direction it should be going, which is from the top left down towards us, towards the bottom right. And that means that all the lighting in the scene has to be adjusted for that. So you can see it's not merely about throwing photos together, because now I have to worry about lighting, which is a fundamental of its own, right? You have to understand how shadows are cast. You have to understand what direction it is. How do you control that? Are your shadows blurring? Why are they blurring? All of these things have to come into play. And so now I'm separating each element as it pertains to value system. I need to work it backwards in order to have each element read off the other, because without this, you're going to be stuck with a very, very flat image with a lot of detail and a lot of flatness. So it's important to work up your values at this point of a painting and start getting some real depth in there. So this, by the way, trumps all the color in your painting. Your painting can have the best colors in the world. If your value system is broken and not working, neither will your painting. Your painting will fall apart. Your landscape will fall apart. So using atmospheric perspective and clear object overlap is a really convincing way of getting objects to read and go backwards. And you can see each one of the elements in this painting, as it recedes back into atmospheric perspective, is losing local darkness. It's losing that contrast. And so I'm using different values, I'm using different modes on my layers to control all of that. All right, so almost at the point at which I'm going to start dropping some figures in here. And at that point, what I'm going to do after these values have been corrected and the figures are in is I'm going to pause and talk a little bit about some of the notes. In other words, the fixes that we have to implement after we've included some additional details in here. So first up, we've added some atmospherics and lighting. There you go. I've added some changes to the background. I've added an additional building on top of the hill. And next I'm going to add a couple flags to the rooftops at the back. So there's a couple flags, and finally some characters in here. So let's jump into the notes and talk about how to fix this and take this, what we have here, to the next level. All right, so here is the stopping point at which we are happy with the elements that we've dropped into the scene. Now we need to refine these elements and get them to read a little bit stronger, create some focal points, and get into the details that are broken. So I've broken this down into an overpass of all the issues I see in the image. So let's jump to that next. Okay, here we go. So we can see that these two elements at the top here are the same. Now, for the purposes of just putting something together, that's totally fine. You found something, you're putting it in place, it works with perspective. That does work. However, we can't have a mirror image of something, it looks too weird. In addition to that, this hole here is not centered with the bricks, so I need to change that as well. So both of these elements need to change. Next up, we have this really interesting foreground with two characters stepping down the stairs where an old lady is looking at them. Now, here we've got a bunch of lighting issues, namely that the characters look like they're being lit from the top left, which is where our lighting is coming from. So from that point of view, we're winning. But the problem is they are in light, whereas the staircase isn't. So what we need is some kind of flow on the stairs here of light piercing through the top left in order for us to highlight these characters. In addition to that, by using photos like this, we have a very high detail density on the characters, which sometimes can be jarring. We don't necessarily want to recognize the people in the paintings if they're an actor or whatever. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but for me, I like to homogenize things into slightly painted territory. We're obviously keeping a lot of the detail in this painting to be sort of semi-realistic, right? We'll paint out a lot of other detail. We are also missing paint texture here with this additional form that's sticking out of this building here. We need to infer detail like these brick faces onto that. We also have a huge problem, which is the ground was rushed, so much so that we have all these artifacts of photos, right? So we have a lot of brushwork to get in here and clean up the ground and the texture of the ground. So in addition to that, I might simplify some of the texture of the leaves as well and just kind of paint over them as well. I'll reduce the detail on the lady back here and I'll make it look more obviously like she's opening the door by darkening up the background here. This area here looks quite empty. I thought I'd put some chickens here, maybe even one over there. And on the right-hand side here, we have an issue, which is the painting right now is flowing from the top left down through the main characters, which have a focal point, down to this path area. And it's trying to move up into the painting, but there's nothing stopping it here. So for me, compositionally, I want something like a barrier there or a focal point or something to guide us back into the painting and make us care about this road and the characters who are on it. Now, in order to do that, I decided to make these characters more of a focal point too. I really like this little boy and I want to kind of play up the light that's hitting him. And we're going to have to clean up a lot of stuff down here as well on the ground. So I'm going to enlarge these characters here and I'm going to downplay some of the other characters and details. I've also decided to put a statue up here just to kind of fill the space. Some birds in the sky, and I definitely feel like this big rock mountain here is conflicting with the foreground buildings. So I'm going to make it a bit smaller and paint in some of the tower detail and fix some of the perspective that's happening up there. the last thing here that we need to fix is this roof that's tangenting with the side of our image, and the shadow is getting overly dark over here. You can see that it's way too overexposed in the light, and the dark of this image has no detail. So we're going to actually paint the brick detail back in there because it is close to the foreground, so we do want to see some detail. Once we're done with that, we'll basically be done with the image. We can just put in some beautiful sky and something fantastical like a moon, and we'll be done. So let's take a look at the final now with all of that implemented. And there it is, right? You can see painted in texture, chickens, characters bigger, everything's going back. We have a beautiful sky here, lots of life with the birds. The chickens also add just a little element of movement and character to this place to stop it from feeling dead. The characters, of course, are doing that as well. And you can see the shadows. We've painted into the shadows a lot of detail, but not so much, right? We don't need to overly paint there because it's not in the foreground. The midground can have some detail, and the building itself has beautiful colors and pieces to it that allows us to continue with the perspective down here and look towards the horizon, where we have shortened the building over here. We've corrected the back of the top of this foreground. We've centered the hole and we've hollowed it out, and we've created a very strong lighting pass on the characters in the foreground. So now the image is basically done, right? This is presentable. You can show this to someone. You can say, hey, this is a moment in a story, or whatever it might be in the film or TV show, or this is a place that we need to traverse, or a village. It could be something, right? There's no brief here. We're all just having fun painting, but I wanted to show you guys this process. And by the way, even up here, I added quite a bit of structural detail. There wasn't really a path up here, and I painted into this a little bit more to just make it make sense, right? And sometimes that's all you need. You don't need, everything to be highly detailed and crazy. You can even see I've dropped the detail in the bricks here, which we could go back in and detail up. But at this level, I'm quite happy with the painting, and I would say it's about done. So that's it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the process. If you want to see that before and after, we can just run through it here. From there, right, you can see everything's still a bit crude, to here, right? Everything's kind of fixed up and ready to show. So that's it for me. You can see the ground here a little bit cleaner, and we're going to call it a day. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you, I believe, on Thursday with the next one. So ciao, guys.